Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Child Anxiety Fact Podcast. My name is Dawn Friedman, and I'm the owner of Child Anxiety Support, a membership for parents of anxious kids. I have my master's in clinical counseling and additional postgraduate training in child anxiety disorders, including exposure and response prevention and the Supportive Parenting for Anxious Childhood Emotions program, or SPACE program, which was designed by Dr. Ellie Lebowitz of the Yale Child Study Center. I'm also certified in infant-toddler mental health. FACT stands for Frequently Asked Questions, and each week I'll be answering your questions about childhood and teen anxiety. Let's get started. This week's question is, what do I need to teach my child about anxiety? Last week's podcast episode, that was number 60, was how do I find time to work on my child's anxiety? In that episode, I talked about anti-anxiety skills and how it's important that we learn them so we can teach them to our child. And a listener wrote me to ask more about that. They wanted to know what I meant by skills. Okay, so tackling child anxiety has two basic pieces. The first piece is about confronting the anxiety itself, and that's the parenting pitfall piece. That's where we need to learn how to parent our specific child to help us stop avoiding the things that make them anxious. I've talked a lot about that across the podcast. The second piece is learning the cognitive behavioral tools so that your child understands and learns how to manage their anxiety. Anxious people, anxious kids, well, we're going to be anxious if we're sensitive, a little more negative, like we can spot potential problems before they even show up. This would be someone who always has a plan B because they know plan A might not work, or someone who tells you all of the reasons why things are likely to go badly, somebody who's just a little more pessimistic. Anyway, if we have a brain that's prone to anxiety, then anxiety is going to be part of how we operate. Instead of trying to eliminate anxiety, which is just not going to happen, we need to understand it, understand how it works, how it shows up for us as individuals, and we need to know what to do when we're feeling it. Both of these things, not avoiding anxiety, also called exposure, and managing anxiety, are necessary. Learning one without the other is incomplete, but that doesn't mean you have to be learning both simultaneously, like you don't need to make a whole big homework planner and do the things. It's more like you start chipping away at it wherever it feels most accessible, which is what I was talking about last week. We also need to learn those skills for ourselves as parents in order to make sense of them so that we can interpret them for our children. They need to be kind of embedded in our thinking and in the way our family operates. We tend to segregate big discussions as parents. We say, I'm going to set aside this time, I'm going to do this thing. A lot of times when people would bring their children to me for counseling, that was the only time they worked on anxiety, was that 50 minutes a week or every other week. But anxiety, anti-anxiety, needs to be embedded in our thinking. I want you to understand that anxiety is a way we operate. We can't segregate it to a topic with a capital T. Because it's a way of functioning, our anti-anxiety tools need to be brought into that day-by-day functioning as well. Think about other values that are automatically practiced in your family, like living out kindness by saying please or thank you, or living out responsibility by doing homework or housework. These value practices might be so automatic that you don't really notice them. Maybe you only notice them when they don't happen, when your child doesn't say please or thank you. Or maybe you only notice them when you visit another family and say, oh my gosh, they don't do that thing that we just take for granted. A value of anti-anxiety needs to be practiced in the same way. It needs to become an almost instinctive way of functioning. First, we have to learn it. We have to learn how to do it in our family, in our lives, and we need to practice it so that those skills are ready whenever we need them, so we know exactly where and how to reach for them. Let's discuss more about what those skills, those cognitive behavioral tools, look like. I'm going to use the section headings from my CBT family course in the membership to help me organize it. It's important to know that in real life, these skills are not so neatly classified. They overlap each other and they build on each other, but this will give you a general idea. Okay, you ready? Section 1 is understanding anxiety. We need to know how anxiety shows up for us. We need to recognize it. We need to be able to point it out when we see it. How does it show up in our bodies? How does it work? We need to be able to spot it on the horizon. Remember, anxiety is not danger, but it can feel and look like danger, and understanding the difference is a big part of learning to overcome it. Section 2 is feelings literacy. I meet lots of people, not just kids, but also adults, who struggle with knowing how they feel. They don't have words for it. They need to recognize and label and learn to handle their emotions. It's an essential part of our resilient functioning. This is also important as part of that first bit of understanding anxiety, because anxiety can sometimes feel like other emotions, like anger. Anxiety can make us feel irritable or annoyed. It can make us melt down. It can also feel like sadness, feeling anxious about something like, what if nobody asks me to the dance? What if my teacher doesn't really like me? What if I'm failing? That can make us feel sad, and that's also part of anxiety. Section 3 is self-esteem and self-concept. Self-esteem is what we think other people think of us, and self-concept is what we think of ourselves. Lots of anxious kids struggle with self-esteem as just part of that anxious functioning. They may worry excessively about what other people think of them, especially those socially anxious kids, or their negative emotional bias may make them assume that they do know what other people think of them and it's not good. Also, remember that anxious people have an information processing bias that makes them read neutral situations as negative. So, self-esteem, assuming people think the worst of us, that's a piece we need to work on our anxiety. And then there's self-concept. We need to believe that we have the ability to overcome and deal with their anxiety. You'll know your anxious child is struggling with this if they say things like, I can't, I won't be able to, I don't know how to do it. And this can be a chicken and egg thing. Kids may need to feel strong to face their anxiety, but they may need to face their anxiety to feel strong. Section 4 are calm down tools. And lots of families start here. Lots of therapists do too. Most families I talk to have done some calm down practice, especially deep breathing. But I think starting here is putting the cart before the horse. That's why I placed it in the middle of the sections, is I think it's work you do in the middle. They are important skills for sure, but they are absolutely not the be-all, end-all of anxiety. I saw a tweet on Twitter, I'd credit the person if I only knew who it was, who said, never in the history of calming down has anyone calmed down because somebody said, calm down. These tools are just not enough to bring to the anxious table. Section 5 is understanding thinking. This section is about metacognition. That's thinking about thinking. And this is big philosophical work. Little kids are just not going to be able to do this. They're not going to have the developmental capacity. And some children on the autism spectrum may struggle with it too. But that doesn't mean that you as the parent can't get ahead of it. When we learn these skills, when we start operating with those skills in our skill knapsack, we will figure out ways to offer them to our children. We are the bridge that helps our child move from not understanding to understanding by us helping them out with it, by bringing the skills to them when they just don't have them yet. Now, metacognition is hard work for adults too. It can bring up a lot of different feelings, which takes us back to emotional literacy. See what I mean? How it all builds on itself? But don't let the challenges of metacognition discourage you, because understanding thinking, it's a lot of fun too, or at least it can be, and it's definitely something we get to relearn in new contexts. A basic example of metacognition is learning that story, The Blind Men and the Elephant. There are lots of picture book versions, so I'm hoping it's familiar to you. But the gist is, several blind men come across an elephant, and they all experience the elephant differently. One gets a hold of the trunk and says, an elephant is like a snake. One gets a hold of the ear and says, the elephant is like a fan. One gets a hold of the leg and says, an elephant is like a column. That's thinking about thinking, that story, understanding that our perspective defines our reality, and also that our perspective is not always accurate. If you're interested in learning more about that story, you can quickly Google, or you can go to your favorite librarian and say, show me where that picture book lives. Section 6 is shifting attention. This is about learning how to distract ourselves when anxiety threatens to take over. They're mindfulness tools. They give us space to look at our anxiety from a distance. This has overlap with calm down tools, and it has overlap with metacognition. Shifting attention and distraction tools are very powerful, and again, they take practice, and they take practice learning them before we need them. The final section is exposure tasks. Eventually, as we get better at staying out of our parenting pitfalls, our children will start to be able to take over designing exposure tasks or recognizing opportunities to confront their anxiety. This is also a skill, and it's based on all the other skills, and all those other skills help this skill. At the beginning, exposure tasks may be fairly formal. If you join and take the Strong Kids, Strong Families program, you'll see how confronting pitfalls is at first very organized and planned. But as we get better at spotting those pitfalls and seeing those exposure opportunities, it will become second nature. And that's what exposure tasks is all about. You can find ways to teach these skills to yourself. You can buy some of the anxiety workbooks and look them over. They're generally organized like this, but might use different names or break things up a different way. And these are also the kinds of things you're likely to learn with a CBT therapist. And of course, there's CBT family in my membership. I hope this has given you some ideas about building those anti-anxiety values and practices into your family. I welcome any specific questions you might have about any of it. Thank you so much for tuning in this week. If you have a question you would like me to answer on the show, please go to childanxietysupport.com/FAQ. And if you'd like to learn more about the Child Anxiety Support membership, please go to childanxietysupport.com. The membership offers courses, live events, and community to help you design a personalized program to free your family from the trap of child anxiety. I hope you'll consider subscribing to the podcast and sharing it with any friends or family who you think might find it helpful. You can get more of my child anxiety content over at Instagram, where I'm Dawn Friedman, MSED, or on Facebook at the Child Anxiety Support page. Thanks again, and have a great week.